America is undoubtedly the most powerful country in the world, and the greatness of any country is shaped by its citizens and cultural values. However, there are a few things you may believe growing up in America that are considered myths in the rest of the world, particularly in Europe. One of those myths is the hustle culture. In America, you may have heard phrases like hard work pays off, put in the hours, the grind never stops, or earn you keep. These expressions reflect America's obsession with working hard. American culture glorifies and encourages hard work. Practices like having lunch at your desk or working during holidays are common. This stems from the belief that hard work equates to greater value. But this idea of hard work is often seen as a myth in Europe. The European lifestyle reflects a much more balanced approach to work and leisure. For instance, European firms frequently offer flexible working hours, allowing employees to choose their start and end times to better manage personal commitments. Additionally, European countries typically provide more vacation days than the US. For example, workers in France receive about 30 days of statutory annual leave compared to only about 11 days per year for Americans. According to a report, people work an average of 1,811 hours annually compared to 1,500 hours in Northern Europe. Working longer hours is normalized in America, and failing to meet deadlines can have serious consequences. However, there are upsides to working hard. For instance, US employees generally earn 40% more than their European counterparts. Reports indicate that average salary in America exceeds $66,000, whereas Europeans on average earn approximately $30,000. But high earnings don't necessarily translate into a better lifestyle or social well-being. According to 2022 data, Americans had a life expectancy of 77.5 years, while Europeans had a life expectancy of 80.6 years. In fact, European countries consistently rank higher on the happiness index, with Finland topping the list this year, whereas America has fallen to 23rd place. So even though Americans earn more and pay less in taxes than Europeans, they're still less happy. Furthermore, as stated before, hard work doesn't always equate to more value. A study conducted at Boston University found that managers couldn't distinguish between employees working 80 hours a week and those merely pretending to. While employees who admitted to working fewer hours were penalized, there was no evidence that they achieved less or that overworkers achieved more. Not only does hard work fail to provide more value, but it also negatively impacts mental well-being. Research shows that overwork leads to issues such as poor sleep, depression, health disease, and many more. And I also work very hard to create these videos, but still 99% of people who watch my videos don't subscribe. So please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue creating content for you. At the moment, I'm not earning anything from these videos, so even a small gesture of support would go a long way in keeping this journey alive. Thank you so much for believing in me and being a part of this community. Now, interestingly, Americans also have higher debt levels than Europeans, even though they earn more. According to a CEIC report, household debt in the US has reached around 62.3% of GDP, indicating a high level of consumer borrowing. In contrast, European household debt levels are generally lower, averaging about 44.4% of GDP. One of the main culprits behind this disparity is consumerism in American society. In the US, material possessions are often viewed as indicators of success. This mindset encourages individuals to work harder to acquire goods that symbolize status and achievement, perpetuating the cycle of consumerism. Kate McKelly, a US expat living in Prague, says, and I quote, "My whole adult life, I've never been a huge Christmas person. I find Christmas hugely stressful a lot of the time because of having to get gifts for people and the way all the stores in America bombard you with buy stuff, buy stuff, buy stuff." Another US expat, Kelly Williams, living in Spain, says, "When I go to the grocery store here, I don't have 500 options for everything staring back at me. It's a completely different thing when you're standing in a grocery store and have 2 options of brands for ketchup or milk. It's not 10 different brands to choose from." Now, in my opinion, if American society shifted its focus away from seeking value in material possessions and instead prioritized building meaningful human connections, they would lead to a far better quality of life. One of the biggest cultural shocks when moving to Europe after living in America is the tipping culture. A tip by definition means a sum of money given to someone as a reward for a service. Tipping is meant to be a form of gratitude, not a hidden tax that you're forced to pay. However, growing up in America, you often see people tipping. If your parents took you out to dinner when you were a kid, you probably saw them tipping. Today, if you dine out in America, it's expected to tip an additional 20% of the bill. And if you think this is normal, then visiting Europe might surprise you. In Europe, there isn't a strong tipping culture. If you want to tip, you can, but it's usually between 5 to 10% and only for exceptional services. You don't have to stress about how much to tip or what the appropriate amount should be. Brooke Black, an American expat living in Denmark, says, and I quote, "While there is no minimum wage set in Denmark, there's an agreement with the unions and people are paid well, so there's no expectation to tip. I can't tell you how much of a relief it is when I go to a coffee shop and they give me the machine to pay and cross out the tip before even giving it to me. I'm glad that people get paid well and I don't have to think about it and have this awkward moment with tipping." Now, from an economic perspective, tipping shifts the responsibility of fair compensation from employers to customers. The system allows businesses to pay their employees significantly lower wages, often as lower as $2 to $3 per hour, on the assumption that tips will supplement their income. According to data, more than 57% of the median earning restaurant workers' income comes from tips. Many argue that this arrangement is fundamentally unfair, and it places the burden of ensuring livable wages on customers rather than on employers, who should be accountable for their compensation. In contrast, there are no such implications in Europe. In fact, in many regions of the world, tipping is seen as an insult to the service providers. By the way, what's your take on tipping culture? Please share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear them. One of the major and most noticeable cultural differences between American and European societies is that America is an individualistic society, whereas most European nations value collectivism. Phrases like "every man for himself" or "do your own thing" reflect the individualistic culture of America. You can also see a reflection of individualism in their interpersonal connections and how Americans interact with each other. In 2001, researchers analyzed the distance that people of different cultures maintained when talking with someone, and found that people from the US and UK maintained the largest personal distance, whereas people from Latin American countries maintained the least distance. This finding reflects the cultural influences of individualistic and collectivist societies. The positive side of individualism is that it promotes the freedom to express oneself without undue societal pressure. The emphasis on self-sufficiency fosters resilience, which is another positive aspect of individualistic societies. As someone who has lived in America, these values might mean a lot to you, and you might think that's how life should be. But moving to Europe might change your perspective on life, because in many European countries, they believe in collective cultures. You feel a strong sense of belonging and don't feel lonely in such an inclusive environment. From American standards, Europeans may not seem independent. They lean on family, friends, and their trusted community. It may look needy, but they are happier. Living in Europe, you may learn that freedom isn't isolation, it's connection. Relying on others isn't weakness, it's humanity. As Homo sapiens, we have thrived in environments where we were able to form groups and work towards common goals. But individualism seems to drift away from that. The competitive nature of individualism can foster an environment where people view each other as rivals rather than collaborators. This mindset can lead to stress, anxiety, and a lack of cooperation within communities. Gallup's annual survey of global emotions finds that more than half of United States respondents, that is around 55%, reported feelings of high stress, which were significantly higher than the global average of 35%. Studies have shown that people in highly individualistic societies report higher rates of social isolation compared to those in collectivist cultures. According to the American Psychological Association, middle-aged Americans are lonelier than their European counterparts. Now, all this might paint a gloomy picture of individualistic societies and a rosy one for collectivist cultures. However, individualistic societies often offer freedom of expression and greater economic prosperity, which is not always the case in collectivist cultures. So it ultimately comes down to personal preference. Some people value personal space, while others thrive in close-knit communities. By the way, what kind of social culture would you prefer? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Here's another video that you might find useful, so feel free to check it out.